Welcome, everyone. Good morning. It is so good to see your faces here. Let us give thanks to God for this beautiful summer day and for being together on the journey. In these times when it seems so hard to keep our heads above the water, and the turbulence and the danger of these times. And so we gather together to hear that voice of love, to experience that presence together within and among and all around us. That invitation that says, come, fear not, do not doubt, follow me in the ways of love. Let us open ourselves to the hope of this Kairos time, this inflection point, this time where we are invited, moved to become collectively more awoke, compassionate, curious, humble, listening and seeking God's presence and guidance and love in community, in transformation together here in this place. And so welcome every bit of yourselves, especially those of you who are here with us for the first time. Whether you're old or young, or sick or well, or queer or straight, afraid or at peace, lonely or overwhelmed with Zoom meetings. Welcome people of all colors and genders and body shapes and sizes, all physical and mental abilities and moments, all of us connected in our need, in our great need for the Holy Spirit and her wisdom and power to change us from the inside out and to move us on this journey together to consciously repair our brokenness. And in this gathering, in this community, in this one body, let us be made a little more perfect and a little more whole in our sharing. And now let us hear the music for preparation by Ken Miedema, Hope in God.
This song can sound hopelessly naive, and you can take it that way, but as I have sung this across the years, it has meant different things to me, and I don't take it so naively now. I hold on to hope in a different way than I did when I was a young believer, and maybe you do too. When you're under the desert sun and you reckon you got no place left to run, whatever the season, your very life is a reason to hope in God. When you're running to stay alive and you reckon you got no way to survive, whatever the season, your very life is a reason to hope in God. Hope in God. It's easy when you're talking it. Words are cheap. We all know what to say. Just like Job. Harder when you're doing it. Your house is gone. Your friends are gone. Your life is ebbing away. I said, when that prison is locked up tight, and you reckon you got no way out tonight, whatever the season, your very life is a reason to hope in God. Yeah. Come on, Peter, right out of your comfort zone. Out of that boat, Peter, you don't make this walk alone. Come on, Peter, take the risk and take the chance. Come on, Peter, you're gonna walk and maybe even dance now. Hope in God, it's easy when you're talking it. Words are cheap, and we all know what to say. Just like Peter, harder when you're doing it. You're out in the water, you think you are drowning, and your life is ebbing away. I said your life is ebbing away. I said your life is ebbing away. When that storm cloud is kicking up waves, your little rowboat is just too far gone to save. Whatever the season, your very life is a reason. Whatever the season, your very life is a reason, yeah. Whatever the season, your very life is a reason. Out of that boat, Peter, out of your comfort zone. Out of that boat, Peter, you're not doing this walk alone. Out of that boat, Peter, take the risk and take the chance. Out of that boat, Peter, you're gonna walk and you're gonna dance. Whatever the season, your very life is a reason to hope in God.
Yowza! Thank you, Ken, for that good news. Whew. Which leads us to today's gospel. And we continue in our journey through the gospel according to Matthew, who again sees Jesus as the prophesied Messiah of the Hebrew scriptures. And just before today's reading, Jesus empowers his disciples to have faith in God, hope in God, to provide the daily bread like manna from heaven. And he empowers his disciples, you, give them something to eat. And somehow, in their sense of scarcity with only 5 loaves and 2 fish, together somehow 5,000 people have enough to eat. And Jesus is exhausted and needs to get alone to a quiet place to pray. And so he sends his disciples forward ahead of him out at sea in the night on a dangerous journey to the other side. Hear these words from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 14, verses 22 through 33 from the NIV. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After Jesus dismissed the crowd, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. And when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," Jesus said. And then Peter got down out of the boat and walked upon the water and came toward Jesus. But when Peter saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed back into the boat, the wind died down. And those who were in the boat worshiped Jesus, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So ends our reading. Let us meditate on these words together in the sanctuary of our hearts and minds. So many of you know, but some of you might not, that I grew up in the ocean state, Rhode Island, and I fell in love with the wind and the water and the sunlight. And sailing for me became a spiritual practice. This regular ritual of dragging our sunfish down from the beach wall on Barrington Beach, especially on windy, hazy, hot summer afternoons, into the choppy, refreshing waters of Narragansett Bay. It was my closest mystical experience to flying, at being literally at one with the wind and waves and sunlight. And in fact, each one of us is wind and waves and sunlight. It was exhilarating, beautiful, and wild. And yes, at times, even life-threatening. And over the years, I learned to have deep respect for how dangerous and powerful the elements are, and how important it is to be aware of our limits, including the illusion that we're in control. Sailing taught me much about that. And I love today's gospel story, and I will never forget the great jokes that I learned about related to this story, today's parable, in church school as a kid. There were various scenarios, like the one about the rabbi, the Buddhist monk, and the priest. I don't know how many of you know this or want to hear it, but here goes. So there was a priest, a rabbi, and a Buddhist monk, and they're sitting together in a boat fishing. And the rabbi looks at his watch and he says, "Hey, it's lunchtime and I am starving. And whoa, up there on shore, there's a restaurant. I'm going to go eat there." So he steps forward. He walks to the shore on the surface of the lake as if it were solid. The monk watches him and says, "Yeah, I'm really hungry too. I'm also going to go ashore and have some lunch." So he steps overboard and he walks on the water to the shore. And then the priest is sitting there in the boat and he's really confused. And finally he says, "God, if a rabbi and a Buddhist monk can walk on the water, then I should be able to do that just like Jesus, right?" And so the priest steps overboard and he sinks like a rock. And the rabbi and the monk are watching him trying to climb back into the boat. And they turn to one another from the shore and they say, "Maybe we should have told him about the submerged sandbar in the water." So the humor in these jokes, and maybe the reason it was funnier in the 70s than today, besides my delivery and besides the fact that many of you might have already heard that joke, comes from the fear that I once had of challenging the system of beliefs about God and Jesus that were handed down to me, to us, from the Roman Catholic Church. And who was I to doubt? As I once understood it as a kid, to doubt the literal story and the system of beliefs handed down by the institution was to doubt God and Jesus. In essence, for me as a child, the institution was God. And we're supposed to believe God, to have faith in God. And to doubt God is to rebel against his, definitely his, authority. And rebellion is sin punishable by death. And by laughing in response to these jokes, reacting in the most humanly imaginable way possible, and expressing doubt in these literal miracles, I was skating on very thin ice. By the mid-70s, when I was a teenager, my reaction was, right, Jesus walked on the water. Jesus had only one son, only begotten Son named Jesus, who was also God, whose mother was a virgin, who rose bodily from the dead, and so will we, or some of us anyway. And in a world that was defined by Darwin and Freud and Einstein and, yes, the Beatles, it all seemed hard to believe. But I had to believe in order to be loved and accepted by God. And try as I might, I couldn't. So rather than be rejected by God, I rejected that version of God. And it took me a long time and a lot of suffering to open myself again to the stirrings of the spirit and the heart, to a different kind of faith. A faith defined not by belief, but by an orientation of the heart, the way of love. And this faith, this orientation of the heart, has room for doubt. Doubt is not an unwanted guest, but it's a friend, it's an ally. In the 3rd century, Augustine himself once said, "Our questions are our faith seeking understanding." Faith which does not doubt, I believe, is dead. Much like sailing, I think faith, real faith, is fluid and curious. It's not reactionary and resistant. It coexists, it co-conspires. It's always moving. It's always open to the new information, whether it's personal experience, inspiration of others, and the public revelation of science, including paying attention to the weather reports before you go out sailing and small craft warnings and knowing where the sandbars are. Faith doesn't fear doubt. Only orthodoxy does. And most of us who grew up in orthodox religions learned that faith is the answer and doubt is the enemy. But that's not true. Doubt is nothing to be afraid of. In a world of dangers to body and soul, doubt is a source of safety. When advertisers tell us that smoking cigarettes will make us sexy, doubt protected our health. When Jim Jones commanded his followers to mass suicide, only doubters survived. When the Bush administration insisted that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and threatened our national security, doubt would have changed the course of history. Doubt in dogma, doubt in authority, doubt in propaganda, doubt in the news media, this is healthy doubt. The opposite of doubt is not faith, but certainty. The opposite of faith is not doubt, but indifference. Certainty is of the mind. Faith is of the spirit. Certainty closes us to possibilities. Faith opens us to what's possible, beyond our limiting beliefs, our limiting mental frameworks, beyond our doubts and our fears, all of which leads us to today's parable about faith. Peter's brief walk on the water appears only in Matthew's gospel. Mark includes a story of Jesus walking on the water, calming the storm. John has a shorter version, and all three appear right after the feeding of the 5,000. And after that exponential growth of food available, Peter's faith also rose like yeast exponentially, the bread rising. I love Peter. There's something so appealing about him for me. He's passionate. He's always rushing to things. He says what other people are only thinking. He does what others would not dare do. Peter asks Jesus to explain his parables. He answers Jesus's questions first. He's the first to understand Jesus' true identity, but he fails to understand the cost of discipleship. Peter's the one who takes risks, who makes great leaps of faith. He rises and then he falls, just like the waves on the ocean. But he gets up again and again and again. And so it's easy to love him because he reminds me so much of myself and all of us, full of faith one minute, full of doubt the next. He's real. He's authentic. What you see is what you get. And so after today's story, everyone's fed. Jesus makes the disciples get out in the boat and go ahead of him. And when Jesus is alone, he's praying. The disciples are caught in this terrible storm, this terrifying storm at sea at night. And in their distress, Jesus appears to them on this turbulent, boiling water, the wind and the waves crashing in the night. And at first they think he's a ghost. And I always wondered, why didn't Peter, who's always the first to speak, say something like, shout out, Lord, if it's you, save us. Jesus gets closer, and Peter says to him the strangest thing. Lord, if it's you, tell me to come out to you on the water. And if we could hear that as if for the first time, as if we hadn't heard this sermon, this parable over and over again, let us ask ourselves, why would he ask that? What is it that moved Peter, that moved Jesus, that moves all of us to go beyond our fear, beyond our reason, beyond our doubt, beyond our beliefs, even in the face of death? To me, the answer is simple. It's love. Peter loves Jesus. He's grown to love Jesus' boundless capacity to love everyone and everything. And in him, he experiences life and meaning. And not only does Peter want to follow Jesus, he wants to become like Jesus. So Jesus says, come. And so Peter swings his legs over the side of the rocking boat while all the other disciples watch with their hearts pounding and they're barely able to breathe. Peter places his feet on the surface of the water. The waves are crashing on the sides of the boat. The wind is whipping in his hair. His eyes are almost blinded from seeing. Peter puts his flat feet on top of the heaving surface of the water. He reminds me of a toddler taking his very first steps, teetering, his eyes fixed on his beloved parent. And he walks. And he's doing fine until this gust of wind almost topples him over. And Peter gets scared and he feels his feet sinking into the black water below. And he goes down like a rock. Maybe most of us here have never tried to walk on water unless, of course, it was ice. But I think we all know how Peter feels. Think of those times when you have taken a great risk, learning how to ride a bike, learning how to ski, falling in love, giving your first public speech, going after a job that you really want, whatever it might be, a piano recital. Your attention is focused on who or what you love rather than what you fear. You're in the zone. And suddenly you take your mind off of that which you love, and your mind is drawn to what you fear. You lose confidence, and the whole adventure comes crashing down in a moment. Lord, save me, Peter says. He cries out, and Jesus does. He reaches out, catches him, and hauls him out over into the boat like this great floundering fish, dragging him over to the other disciples back in the boat. And then there are those awful words, "Oh man of little faith, why did you doubt?" If we're honest with ourselves, it's the same words many of us ask ourselves every day. Why don't I have more faith? Why am I afraid to let go and let God take care of me? I believe I'm in God's good hands, but then life happens. The storms of life happen. I lose my job, my health, I lose a loved one, and I start to lose faith and I begin to sink. I believe God is present and active in the world, but then how do you and I reconcile that with all of the innocent suffering that is happening, particularly now in the world? Matthew could have told the story differently. What if Peter had jumped out of the boat with perfect confidence and landed on both feet and waltzes across the water, smiling and waving at the disciples, and then they all come out after him and it's all perfectly choreographed? While the storm rages on and the wind beats the sails and lightning splits the dark night sky above their heads? Might be a great story, might be a better story, but it wouldn't be our story because we are so much like Peter. The truth about us is we follow and we fear. We walk and we sink. We believe and we doubt. We do both. Our faith and our doubt buoy us up and bear us down, giving us courage, feeding our fears, supporting our weight on the wild seas of our lives, and sinking us like stones. But back to our childhood understanding of these stories. After we are disillusioned by the system of beliefs of our childhood, many of us resolve never to be fooled again. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. We harden our hearts against all appeals of the spirit. Or like a lover who's been betrayed, we reject love itself. Not merely skeptical, we become cynical. Skepticism says, show me. Cynicism says, I refuse to be shown. I refuse to have faith in the possibility. But between this certain belief in false gods and the certain disbelief in all gods, I believe there's this field of infinite possibility. And it is in this field that we are free to wander and to explore and to play. And what better place than to do it here together at Skyline on the journey together, where at our very best, we promise acceptance of one another and encouragement of our spiritual growth and a free and responsible search for truth and meaning and the right of conscience. And it is in my hope that we do more and more of this together, including in our book study, The Great Spiritual Migration, right after today's service. Because here, I believe at our best, faith and freedom, spirit and skepticism, reverence and curiosity, they are joyful companions. Because here at our best, with others whose ideas and practices may be radically different from our own, we cultivate compassion in respectful dialogue. And here at our best, we honor the wisdom of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who calls faith not a clinging to a shrine, but an endless pilgrimage of the heart. Here at our best, just like the Zen saying, all religions are like fingers pointing toward the moon. But so often we confuse the finger with the moon toward which it's pointing. We learn to take the journey seriously, ourselves not so much, and we hold on lightly. James Finley, a former Trappist monk and colleague of Thomas Merton, understands well the paradox of doubt. In the grace of enlightened ignorance, he says, we know that we do not know. In the beginning, to know that we do not know, we come to a way of grounded knowledge in humility and filled with the mysterious potential of contemplative self-transformation, in the willingness to trust in the midst of complexity, we begin to know the peace of God. And so, especially these days, in the midst of the storms of our lives, in the midst of our doubts and our fears that sometimes paralyze us, it is precisely at such times that we are invited to stop long enough to catch a glimpse of love, of abundance, of hope, of new life incarnate, right beside us in the storm if we only have eyes to see. We take one step to God, and God takes a million steps toward us. So let us step out together on this journey, this pilgrimage, this migration, and let's be willing to get our feet wet. Amen. And we will now hear our sermon response from Ken Miedema.
One baby step, I can hardly believe it. One baby step, and I crash to the floor. Now I can hear her, she's clapping and cheering. Come on, my baby, just take one step more. How can I move when I'm standing here shaking, here on the edge of this yawning abyss? Now I can hear her, she's clapping and cheering. Come on, my baby, and I'll give you a kiss. And I say, Mama, come quickly. Your baby is crying. Mama, come quickly and open your arms. Oh, what a day, I can hardly believe it. Bread for the thousands, and still there was more. When it was over, he needed some quiet, so he told us to move and he'd see us cross on the shore. Black is the night, and ghostly the figure, walking so calmly through night's awful roar. Now he is calling, and now I am leaping. Walk to me, Peter, just take one step more. How can I move when I'm standing here shaking, here on the edge of a frozen abyss? Now he is shouting, come walk to me, Peter. Surely you'll do things much greater than this. One baby step, and we thrill with its taking. One baby step, and we crash to the floor. Now all at once, we can hear Jesus calling, rise up, my church, and take just one step more. How can we move when we're standing here shaking, here on the edge of this yawning abyss? The world is a crashing, chaotic cacophony. When we signed up, it was nothing like this, nothing like this. Christ always with us. Your children are crying. Give us a vision of your strong arms, of your strong arms. little old skyline on the edge of disaster, and the waves and the wind could tear us apart. We'll take one baby step toward a brand new tomorrow. Jesus, come open your arms and come show us your